She was 4 years old. 4 years old, standing in the middle of the pack's great hall in her good dress, with her father's hand on her shoulder and his new wife beside him, and 300 wolves watching as the Alpha formally introduced his new Luna to Crestfall pack. The ceremony had been going perfectly, until Lira Ashvale saw me across the room. The moment she spotted me, standing near the back where I had positioned myself deliberately, professionally, with the composed distance of someone who understood that this was no longer her world to stand near the front of, everything changed. Her small face crumpled. Not the slow, building cry of a child who was tired or overwhelmed. The specific, sudden cry of a child who has spotted the exact person she needed and understood, in the same instant, that something was wrong with the fact that person was standing so far away. She said one word. Not mama. She had never called me that, had never been given reason to, had been too young when I was in her daily life to attach that particular word to anyone but the mother she had lost. She said my name, Senna, and then she pulled out of her father's grip, the Alpha of Crestfall pack, whose formal authority extended to every wolf in that hall, and she ran. Across the great hall. Through 300 watching wolves. To me. And the new Luna, standing at the front of the room in her formal gown with the flower crown that tradition required, watched a 4-year-old girl choose a pack nursery worker over her on the most important night of her introduction to the community. The silence in that hall was the loudest thing I have ever heard. If you have ever been chosen by someone in a moment that cost you everything, this story is going to reach inside you and not let go. Like the video, hit that subscribe button right now and drop in the comments where you are watching from. What happened after Lira ran to me that night changed everything. Let's begin. My name is Senna Coll. I am 24 years old, and for the past 2 years I've been the head nursery worker in Crestfall Pack's children's care facility, the communal space where the pack's youngest wolves spent their days while their parents worked, staffed by a small team of wolves whose entire professional purpose was the specific, demanding, endlessly rewarding work of caring for very small people. I was not born in Crestfall. I came from a smaller pack to the north, Grinwick, a quiet, working community pack with none of Crestfall's scale or political weight, where I had grown up as the eldest of 4 children in a family that was ordinary in the best sense of the word. My mother had been a teacher. My father had been a woodworker. I had been, since I was old enough to be helpful, the kind of person who was good with children, good in the specific, natural way that did not require effort or technique. That was simply the result of genuinely enjoying small people and the way they encountered the world. I had trained formally in child development at the Regional Institute, received my certification at 21, and taken the position at Crestfall because it was the best opportunity available in the placement network, because the facility was well-resourced and the leadership was good, and because I had wanted, at 22, to see something larger than the world I had grown up in. I had not expected Lira Ashvale. She had come to the nursery facility 11 months after I joined the staff. Her father, Bren Ashvale, the Alpha of Crestfall Pack, 32 years old, who had been raising his daughter alone since his wife Cara had died 14 months earlier from a sudden, aggressive illness that the healing house had been unable to treat in time, had carried her in on a Tuesday morning in September with the specific, compressed efficiency of a man who had been managing everything alone for over a year and was just barely keeping the seams together. She was 3 years old. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's gray eyes and the specific, watchful quality of a small child who had learned, in the past year, that the world could change very fast without warning. She did not cry when Bren left her. She stood in the middle of the nursery room and she looked around at the other children, the toys, the carefully arranged space that was designed to feel safe and welcoming, and then she looked at me. I crouched down to her level. "Hi," I said. "I'm Senna. What's your name?" A pause. "Lira," she said. "Hello, Lira," I said. "Would you like to see the book corner? We have a section on wolves in the wild that has the best pictures." She thought about this with the serious consideration of someone conducting due diligence. Okay, she said. By the end of that first Tuesday, she had shown me her favorite color, yellow, informed me that her father made the best porridge, but it was too thick, and fallen asleep in the reading corner with her head on my lap, and a book about migration patterns open across her knees. I need to tell you about the year that followed, because it is impossible to understand what happened at the formal introduction ceremony without understanding what that year was. Lira Ashvale was, from her very first Tuesday, the most singular child I had ever worked with. Not because she was precocious, though she was, in the specific, earnest way of children who had spent too much time in adult spaces and had absorbed adult patterns of attention and speech without losing the fundamental wonder of childhood. Not because she was exceptionally gifted or particularly easy or any of the other qualities that sometimes made individual children stand out. Because she was, fundamentally, a child who had lost the primary safe person in her life and was trying, with everything she had, to be okay anyway. She was 3 years old and she was managing grief. Not consciously. Not in any way she could have articulated, but the watchfulness was there. The careful quality of her attachments. The way she would test a relationship, asking the same question multiple times on different days, watching to see if the answer changed, establishing whether the responses she received were consistent and reliable. She tested me for 6 weeks. I answered consistently every time. And somewhere in the 7th week, something shifted. She stopped testing. She simply arrived on Tuesday mornings and found me immediately and began, without preamble, telling me about whatever had been the most important thing in her world since the last Tuesday, because she had learned that I would listen with genuine attention and would remember next time. She called me Senna the way some children called teachers by their first names, with a familiarity that was neither overstepping nor inappropriate, simply accurate to the quality of relationship we had built. She brought me things. A small stone she had found near the pack's outer garden that she considered remarkable. A drawing she had made at home, her father and her, rendered in yellow and brown crayon, very carefully, in a composition that placed them both under a large sun. A leaf from the old oak near her cottage that she wanted me to press and keep. I kept everything she brought me. In a small box on my desk in the nursery, carefully organized, labeled with dates in my own handwriting. Because these things mattered. Because she had chosen to share them with me, which meant they mattered. Her father came to the nursery facility on a Thursday afternoon in her 2nd month. Not to pick her up. Her pickup was usually mid-afternoon, handled by the Alpha's household coordinator, a practical and efficient woman named Asta, who had been managing the logistical details of Bren's household since Kara's death, and who I had developed a warm professional relationship with. Bren came himself because there had been an incident. Nothing serious. Lira had refused, for the 2nd consecutive day, to participate in the group nap period, causing some disruption to the afternoon schedule and leading the staff to determine that her father should be consulted about whether there were underlying issues at home affecting her sleep. He arrived at 3 o'clock. I was in the main playroom, supervising the afternoon free period, when Asta came to tell me the Alpha had arrived and was asking to speak with whoever had primary contact with Lira. That was me. I met him in the small consultation room adjacent to the main facility. He was, I want to describe this accurately rather than with the retrospective weight of knowing what came later. He was a man who was very tired and was managing the tiredness with considerable discipline. Tall, dark-haired, with the specific contained quality of someone who had been carrying a great deal for a long time and had decided that the carrying was simply what was required, and there was no point making a display of the weight. He sat across from me in the consultation room, and he asked about Lira. I told him, with the honest, specific detail that I believed all parents deserve from the people caring for their children, what I had observed in 8 weeks of working with his daughter. The watchfulness, the testing phase, and what it had looked like. The shift in the 7th week. The specific ways she was doing well and the specific areas where the grief was still visible in her behavior, including the sleep disruption that had brought him here today. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She brought you a stone," he said. "Yes," I said. "2 weeks ago. She said it had an unusual color. She showed me the same stone," he said. "She told me she was going to give it to someone very important." I did not know what to say to that. "She's going to be all right," I said instead, not as a platitude, but as a genuine assessment from someone who had been watching her closely for 8 weeks. "She's working through something enormous for a 3-year-old, but she's working through it. She has good instincts for how to find what she needs." He looked at me. "Yes," he said. "She does." We discussed the sleep disruption for another 10 minutes, practical strategies, the relationship between anxiety and sleep patterns in young children who had experienced loss, specific things he could try at bedtime. He thanked me. He left. He came back the following Thursday, not because of another incident, just to check in. Bren Ashvale came to the nursery facility every Thursday for the next 4 months. Not always to see me specifically. He had genuine administrative oversight responsibilities related to the facility as one of the PAC's communal childcare resources, and some of his Thursday visits involved conversations with the facility director or other staff members. But some of them were just to talk. About Lira. Always nominally about Lira, her progress, her social development, the specific things she had been working through in the facility that week. I was her primary contact, and these conversations were professionally appropriate. They were also, I began to understand somewhere in the 3rd month, something more than professional. He asked good questions, the kind that required genuine thought to answer, not the reflexive, procedural questions that parents sometimes asked as a way of demonstrating engagement without really wanting detailed answers, but the actual questions of a father who was paying close attention and wanted to understand his daughter more completely. He also, over those months, occasionally asked questions that had nothing to do with Lira, about how I had come to this work, about what I found meaningful in it, about what the most difficult part of caring for children in grief was. I answered honestly, because honesty was what the relationship had been built on from the beginning, and because I want to be direct about this, even though it complicates the story. I had begun, somewhere in those Thursday afternoons, to look forward to them in a way that I was careful not to examine too closely. He was the alpha of the pack I worked in. He was a grieving widower with a 3-year-old daughter. He was not a person I was going to allow myself to think about in any personal capacity. I was disciplined about this for 4 months. And then one Thursday afternoon, at the end of a conversation that had run 20 minutes past its natural conclusion because neither of us had moved to end it, he said something that made the discipline considerably harder to maintain. "Lira asked me this morning," he said, "whether Senna was going to be at the autumn gathering." The autumn gathering was a pack community event, a celebration open to all Crestfall wolves, held at the end of harvest season. "I hadn't planned to attend," I said. "She'll be disappointed," he said. A pause. "She's not the only one," he said. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at me. And I understood, with the specific, complete clarity of understanding something you had been refusing to understand, that the Thursday afternoons had not been entirely about Lira. I attended the autumn gathering. It would be dishonest to pretend I attended solely because Lira wanted me there. It was a beautiful evening, the pack's common grounds lit with lanterns, the specific warm quality of a community event in early autumn when the air was just cool enough to make the warmth of people and firelight feel like a gift. I found Lira almost immediately, and she took my hand with the easy confidence of a child who had learned to trust that the person she reached for would be there. Bren found us 20 minutes later. We spent the better part of the evening together, the 3 of us, moving through the gathering with the comfortable ease of people who had gotten used to being in each other's vicinity, stopping to talk to other pack members, watching Lira navigate the children's activity stations with the focused determination she brought to everything. It felt, without anyone naming it or arranging it, like a specific kind of evening. The kind that belonged to people who were, quietly and without announcement, becoming something to each other. I want to be honest about the next 6 months. We were careful. Both of us, independently, choosing to proceed with the kind of slow, considered caution that the situation required. He was the alpha. I was a pack nursery worker. He had a daughter who was fragile in specific ways and who had already formed a significant attachment to me in my professional capacity. The intersection of all of those things meant that anything hasty, anything that did not have a solid foundation, would cause more damage than the careful pace was worth. He came to the nursery Thursdays. We talked. We attended 2 more community events together, always with Lira, always in the natural, organic way rather than the staged way of people performing a relationship. And Lira, who was now 3.5, and who had the specific, clear-eyed perception of small children who paid much closer attention than adults assumed, treated the 3 of us being together as simply the natural order of things, without commentary or fanfare. She brought me into her drawings. That was when I knew, from her perspective, it was settled. The drawing she made in the nursery one October afternoon, her father, her, and a third figure, carefully rendered in yellow crayon, labeled in the block letters she was practicing, Senna. 3 figures, under the same sun. I kept it in the box with the stone. And then, in the 7th month of Thursday afternoons, the delegation from Westfin Pack arrived. Westfin was a neighboring pack, larger than Crestfall, with significant political weight in the Northern Territory's governance structure, and with a long-standing interest in formalizing stronger alliance ties with Crestfall that had been discussed at the governance level for several years. The delegation's arrival was formal pack business. Alpha business. The kind of thing that Bren's council had been managing and that I had no direct involvement in and no reason to know much about. What I learned, through Asta, who was the most efficiently informed person in Crestfall by virtue of her position in Bren's household management, was that the Westfin delegation's visit included a specific proposal, not a territorial one, a personal one. Westfin's Alpha was bringing his daughter, Corva Felt, 30 years old, educated, politically connected, with the specific qualifications of someone who had been raised in governance and understood the duties of an Alpha's partner from childhood, was being formally presented as a potential Luna for Crestfall. The councils of both packs had arranged it. In the specific, organized way of governance bodies that understood that an Alpha who had been widowed for 2.5 years and who had a young daughter needed a stable partnership, and that a formal alliance between Crestfall and Westfin through a personal bond would benefit both packs for a generation. Bren had known this was coming. He had not told me. I found out the way I found out most things in those months that I did not find out from Bren directly. From Asta, who arrived at the nursery facility one afternoon with the specific expression of someone who was about to deliver information they wished they did not have to deliver. She told me about the delegation, about Corva Felt, about what the arrangement was. I listened. I thanked her. I finished my shift. I went home and I sat in my cottage for a very long time, and I thought about 7 months of Thursday afternoons and autumn gatherings and 3 figures under the same sun in yellow crayon. And I made a decision. Not dramatically, not in the specific, cinematic way of someone making a declaration that would resolve everything. A quiet, private decision made in a small cottage at the end of an ordinary working day. I was not going to say anything to Bren. Not because I did not have things to say. Because I understood that Bren Ashvale was the alpha of a pack that needed specific things from its governance structure, and that a formal alliance with Westfin was one of those things, and that the decision about how to weigh those needs was his to make, not mine. I had no formal claim on him. The Thursday afternoons had been real. The autumn gatherings had been real. The specific quality of what had been quietly building between us for 7 months had been real. But real was not the same as formal. Real was not the same as declared. And he had not declared anything. I was not going to be the person who complicated a governance decision he had not asked me to complicate, by showing up with feelings I had never formally presented and demands I had no right to make. That was the decision. It cost considerably more than I let myself acknowledge at the time. Bren came to the nursery on the Thursday following Asta's visit. He looked at me when he came in with the specific, careful quality of someone who was assessing whether the person in front of them knew something. I gave him nothing. I discussed Lira's week. I showed him the leaf printing project she had been working on. I answered his questions about her sleep patterns, which had been somewhat disrupted again in the past week. She always sensed when her father was managing something significant, even when she could not name what it was. He looked at me for a long moment when the professional part of the conversation had concluded. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Asta already told me," I said. Silence. "Senna." "It's all right," I said. Genuinely. "I understand." "Do you?" he said. "You have a pack," I said. "And a daughter. And governance obligations that extend beyond personal preference." I kept my voice even. Professionally even. The Westfin Alliance makes sense. Everyone in this facility knows it makes sense. He was very quiet. "What if I said," he said slowly, "that sense wasn't the primary consideration?" I looked at him. "Then I would say," I said carefully, "that you should think very carefully about what the primary consideration is. And take the time to be sure. And not make any decision under pressure from either direction." He looked at me. "That's very measured," he said. "I'm a professional," I said. "Being measured is my job." "I'm not asking you as a professional," he said. I looked at the leaf printing project on the work table. "Bren," I said quietly, "whatever you decide, it has to be what's right for Lira. That's the only non-negotiable." He was quiet for a very long time. "I know," he said. He left. The following week, the Westfin delegation arrived. And 3 months later, Bren Ashvale formally announced his engagement to Corva Felt. I will not describe in detail the 3 months between his decision and the formal introduction ceremony. What I will tell you is that I continued doing my job. I continued being Lira's primary contact in the nursery facility. I continued the Thursday check-in conversations with Bren, which became, in those 3 months, considerably shorter and more formal than they had been. I maintained the professional relationship that the job required, because Lira needed stability more than she needed me to be absent, and because removing myself from her daily life, because her father had made a decision I did not have the standing to contest, would have been a cruelty to a 4-year-old who had already experienced too much loss. I was professional. I was consistent. I was extraordinarily, exhaustingly careful. I attended the formal introduction ceremony because it was a pack event, because the nursery facility's staff had been invited, because absence would have been its own statement. I stood near the back, and then Lira saw me across the room. 300 wolves watched her run to me. I crouched down and caught her. She was 4 years old, and she had her arms around my neck and her face pressed against my shoulder, and she was crying in the specific, honest way of a child who was not performing grief, but was simply expressing something that was too large for her small body to contain silently. "Hey," I said quietly, into her hair. "Hey, Lira. It's okay. Don't go," she said. I closed my eyes for a moment. The hall was very, very quiet. "I'm here," I said. "I'm right here." "Don't go away," she said again. "Like Mama." I held her. I held her for as long as she needed. And then, carefully, I looked up. Bren was at the front of the hall. He was looking at me with the specific, unguarded expression of a man who had been holding himself to a decision that made governance sense and was watching the evidence of what that decision was costing arrive in real time, in the form of his 4-year-old daughter crying in another woman's arms. Corva Felt, his new Luna, stood beside him. She was looking at Lira, not with the fury or jealousy I might have expected, not with the political calculation of a woman whose formal introduction had just been dramatically interrupted, with the specific, complicated expression of someone who was seeing something true that they had perhaps not fully anticipated and who was not certain what to do with that truth. Asta came to find me later that evening. Lira had eventually calmed, had been taken by her father to the family suite, and I had made my way back to the edge of the hall with the specific, controlled composure of someone who understood that this was not the right place or time for anything beyond composure. Asta came to find me when the formal ceremony had concluded and the gathering had transitioned into the more relaxed celebration portion. She sat beside me. She did not say anything immediately. "The new Luna asked about you," she said finally. I looked at her. "She asked Bren, after the hall, who you were," Asta said. "He told her you were Lira's primary carer. She asked how long you had been in that role. He told her 2 years. A pause. She asked if there was more to it than that. I held very still. "What did he say?" I asked. "I wasn't in the room," Asta said, "but I was near it." She looked at her hands. "He was quiet for a long time. And then he said yes." The hall was warm around us, and I was very, very cold. "What happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," Asta said. "I don't think he knows. I think," she paused. "I think Corva felt is a more perceptive woman than anyone on either council gave her credit for being. Corva felt came to the nursery facility 2 days later. Not to see me specifically. She had arranged, through Asta, to tour the PAC's community facilities as part of her orientation to Crest Falls governance structure. The nursery facility was one of those. I gave her the tour myself. Because it was my job. Because I was professional. She was composed and direct and asked genuinely intelligent questions about the facility's operations, the staffing, the developmental philosophies underlying the programming. She had, I could tell, done her homework. She was not asking the surface-level questions of someone performing interest, but the specific questions of someone who had actually read the facility's published guidelines and wanted to understand them more deeply. At the end of the tour, when we had returned to the main entrance, she looked at me. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to be honest." "Yes," I said. "What does Lira need?" she asked. "Not politically. Not for the governance arrangement. What does that specific child actually need?" I looked at her. I had not expected that question. I thought about Lira. About the testing phase and the 7th week and the stone and the drawings in her face when she spotted me across the Great Hall. "She needs consistency," I said. "She needs to know that the people in her life are reliable. That the relationships she has built are not going to disappear without warning." I paused. She's been managing loss for 2 years. Every significant change in her world activates the specific fear that she is going to lose someone else she loves. Corvo absorbed this. "And she loves you," she said. "She has a significant attachment to me developed through 2 years of consistent daily care," I said. "That is a professional relationship." "Is it only that?" she asked. I held her gaze. "I love her," I said. "Yes. In the way that the best version of this work produces, a genuine, deep care for a specific child that goes beyond professional obligation." A pause. "I will not pretend otherwise." "And her father?" she asked. The nursery entrance was very quiet. "That is not a question I am going to answer," I said. "That's an answer," she said. We looked at each other. "I want you to know something," Corva said carefully. "I came to Crestfall because a governance arrangement required someone to come. I agreed to this because the arrangement makes sense, and because I respect what sense means for 400 wolves." She paused. "I did not come expecting to walk into something that was already more complicated than the councils on either side had been honest about." "I'm sorry," I said, "for the disruption at the ceremony." "Don't apologize for that," she said. "A 4-year-old cried for the person who has loved her consistently for 2 years. That is not a disruption. That is information." She looked at the main playroom door, through which the sound of children playing was audible. "I need to think about what I do with information." She left. What happened next unfolded over 3 weeks, and it did not unfold the way any of the 3 adults involved had anticipated. Corva felt requested a formal meeting with Crestfall's council. Not about the alliance terms. About the governance structure surrounding the Alpha's household. Specifically, about the established protocols for the care of the Alpha's daughter, and the staff responsible for that care. The meeting, by Asta's account, was substantive and clear-eyed. Corva presented a specific argument that the alliance between Westfin and Crestfall had been arranged on the assumption that formalizing a personal bond between herself and Bren Ashvale would serve the stability and well-being of the pack, including its youngest members. She had encountered information suggesting that the reality was more complicated than the arrangement had accounted for. She was not, she told the council, prepared to formalize a bond whose foundational premise was incomplete. The council received this with the specific, collective discomfort of a governance body that had arranged something with confident certainty and was now being asked to reconsider. She was not withdrawing from the arrangement. She was requesting a pause, a proper assessment period, an honest accounting of all relevant factors before any formal ceremony proceeded. The council, to its credit, agreed. Bren came to the nursery on a Thursday. He stood in the doorway for a moment before I saw him. When I looked up, the expression on his face was the most unguarded I had ever seen it. "She went to the council," he said. "I heard," I said. "Did you know she was going to?" "No," I said. "She came to the nursery 2 weeks ago for a tour. We talked. I was honest with her. I didn't know what she would do with the conversation." He came into the room. He sat down across from me at the small work table where we had had so many Thursday conversations. "I made a mistake," he said. "You made a decision based on what you understood your responsibilities to be," I said. "I made a decision," he said, "based on what was expected of me, which is not the same thing." I looked at him. "Senna," he said, "I need to tell you something that I should have told you before the delegation arrived." "Then tell me," I said. He looked at his hands. "The Thursday afternoons were never only about Lira," he said. "I think you knew that." "Yes," I said. "And the autumn gathering." "Yes," I said. "And when the delegation was arranged," he said slowly, "I told myself that what made sense for the pack was the primary consideration. That personal preference was secondary." He paused. "That was not entirely honest." "What was the honest version?" I asked. He looked at me. "The honest version was that I was afraid," he said, "of what it meant to want something specific after Kara, of what it meant to look at someone who was part of Lira's daily life and feel the things I was feeling, and to take that seriously rather than treating it as a complication to be managed." "Afraid of what specifically?" I asked. "Of losing this too," he said. "If I named it. If I made it real by naming it. If it became something that could be lost rather than something that was simply present, safe, in the background where nothing could go wrong with it." I sat with that. "You kept it in the background," I said, "and it still went wrong." "Yes," he said. "I know that now." The playroom behind me was full of the sound of children at afternoon activity. Somewhere in that room, Lira was doing the leaf-pressing project she had been working on all week. "What do you want?" I asked. "Not what the council expects. Not what the governance arrangement requires. What do you actually want?" He looked at me. "You know what I want," he said. "Say it," I said. Out loud. To me. He held my gaze. "I want the three of us," he said. "Under the same sun. Like the drawing." I looked at him. "That drawing is in a box on my desk," I said. "I know," he said. "Lira told me." The afternoon light in the nursery was doing the specific thing it did at this time of year, low and golden and very clear. "This is going to be complicated," I said. "Yes," he said. "The council. Westfin. The alliance." "Yes," he said. "All of that. Corva has given me time to be honest about what the actual situation is before the formal ceremony. And I am choosing to use that time to be honest." "And Corva?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Is a genuinely perceptive person who understood something from one conversation with you that I had been refusing to understand for 7 months," he said. "She deserves an honest account, directly from me, of what is real. And whatever she decides after that honest account, whether she chooses to proceed with a modified arrangement or to withdraw entirely and negotiate a different form of alliance, that is her right to decide with full information." I thought about Corva in the nursery entrance. That is information, she had said. I need to think about what I do with information. She was, I had come to believe, a good person in a complicated situation. Not a villain. Not a rival. A woman who had walked into an arrangement that was less honest than it should have been, and who had, upon discovering that, demanded honesty before proceeding. You should talk to her first, I said. Yes, he said. Before anything else. She deserves that. Yes, he said again. And Lira, he said, is the reason I am in this room having this conversation. He looked at me with complete, unmanaged honesty. She has always known what was true, before either of us was willing to say it. The formal Westfin alliance was renegotiated. Not dissolved. Corva and her father's council were, as Asta had observed, more pragmatic and more perceptive than either council had fully credited. The governance benefits of the Crestfall Westfin alliance were real and significant, and Corva felt was a woman who understood that governance benefits did not require a personal bond to be achieved. A formal governance treaty was established, a direct alliance agreement between the two pacts that accomplished the territorial and resource-sharing objectives that the original arrangement had sought, without requiring any personal element. Corva returned to Westfin. She sent Lira, through Asta, a yellow kite. Lira flew it in the outer garden and declared it the best gift she had ever received, and she wrote a letter back, in the careful, large block letters she was still practicing, that said, "Thank you for the kite. It is yellow like the sun. Love, Lira." I helped her spell the hard parts. The formal bond ceremony between Bren Ashvale and me did not happen quickly. It happened 6 months later, in the autumn, the same season of the first gathering, which felt, to both of us, like the appropriate time. It was a small ceremony. Lira stood beside her father. She wore yellow. She held a stone in her hand, the same stone she had given me in the nursery's second month, which I had kept in a box on my desk, and which she had asked, very formally, if she could have back for this specific occasion. You can borrow it, I had told her. I wanted to be at the ceremony, she had said, because it was from the beginning. She was 4 years old, and she understood more than most adults gave her credit for. When the formal words were said and Bren looked at me with the full, unmanaged honesty that had been so long coming, Lira reached up and put the stone in his hand. Hold it, she said. For both of us. He closed his hand around it. I looked at the two of them, the Alpha of Crestfall Pack and his 4-year-old daughter, standing in the autumn light, both looking at me with the same gray eyes, under the same sun. Like the drawing, there is something I have come to understand about love that begins in the most ordinary circumstances. Not the bond, though what arrived between Bren and me, formally acknowledged in the season that followed the ceremony, was real and complete, and the moon goddess's work through and through. But the love that was already there before the bond had a formal name. The love that grew in Thursday afternoons and autumn gatherings, in a small box on a nursery desk full of stones and pressed leaves and drawings in yellow crayon. The love that did not announce itself, did not demand recognition, did not push for space it had not been given. The love that simply showed up, consistently, every Tuesday morning. For a small, serious child with gray eyes and a yellow crayon, and the extraordinary, specific wisdom of someone who had already learned that the world could take people away, and who had therefore developed a very clear, unsentimental ability to recognize the ones who were worth running toward. She had run across a great hall for me, in front of 300 wolves. At 4 years old, she had known before any of the adults did. She had simply been honest about it, in the direct, unencumbered way of children who have not yet learned to put their truest feelings in the background where nothing can go wrong with them. We could all stand to be a little more like her. If you stayed with Senna and Lira from the Great Hall to the autumn ceremony, from the stone in the box to the kite from Westfin, from the drawing under the yellow sun to the moment Lira put the stone in her father's hand, then you already know what this story was really about. It was not about a love triangle. It was about a 4-year-old who saw the truth before anyone else was brave enough to say it. It was about what happens when you keep the real thing in the background to protect it from risk, and discover that the background was never actually safe. It was about a woman who showed up, consistently, without expectation or demand, and trusted that consistent showing up was its own form of love. And it was about a little girl with a yellow crayon who drew 3 figures under the same sun and could not understand why the adults were being so slow about it. Neither could we, Lira. Neither could we. This channel is here every single week for the ones who are in the background, who are consistent and present and genuine, and who have not yet been chosen publicly, not yet been named out loud, who are keeping the real thing quiet, because quiet feels safer than said. Say it. Or let a 4-year-old run across a room and say it for you. Either way, the truth has a way of arriving. Subscribe. Hit that bell. Drop your location in the comments. I need to know where in the world tonight someone needed to hear that the consistent showing up was not wasted, was never wasted, that the stone you put in a box on your desk was always going to end up in someone's hand at exactly the right moment. You are the stone. You are the yellow sun. Come back next week. The next story starts with someone who almost gave up before the right moment arrived. Don't miss it. See you there.